Stay tuned. Ahead I'll talk with Mark Rowlands about the word of dog, what our canine companions can teach us about living a good life. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Mark Rowlands is a professor and chair of the philosophy department at the University of Miami. He's the author of 23 books, including the international bestseller, The Philosopher and the Wolf. And he joins us to talk about the word of dog. Mark, welcome to Some Books Considered.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, your previous best-selling book was about philosophy and a wolf, and this book is about basically philosophy and the life of your dog. So tell us about why you wanted to look at life through the lens of your dog's life.
Yes, I mean, the wolf was probably a wolf hybrid. He was told him he's a wolf, but I strongly suspect he was a wolf hybrid. He was one in a long line of sort of canine friends I've lived with over the years. And I suppose the impetus for this book came from daily walks that I would take with my dog Shadow, who's a German Shepherd, on the canal that runs behind the house. And in the morning when we go, there are scores of iguanas lined up on the bank at roughly regular intervals. And so when I unleash him, he tears off along the bank. The iguanas peel off into the water, swim over to the other side where they stay for the rest of the day. But nighttime, it seems, is a time of forgetting for iguanas. And so the very next morning, they're all back again, ready for Shadow to repeat this act. And eventually, after some years of doing this, one day it just struck me, this is very like the myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus was a god who was a mortal who offended the gods in some way. And the god's punishment was for him to roll a large rock up a hill for all eternity. When he gets to the top, the rock slips from his grasp and rolls all the way back down again, and he has to start all over again. So Sisyphus, when he features in philosophical discussions, Sisyphus features in two ways. First, as the epitome of a meaningless existence, just pointless, repetitive activity that aims only at its own continuation, sort of thing. But secondly, he also features as a sort of allegory for human existence. We fight our way to work in the morning and then spend 8 hours doing something with probably modest results, which will soon be wiped away by time's passage. Then we fight our way home again in the evenings, perhaps waiting for us at home with children, perhaps not. But if there are, then in a few years' time, they will probably have grown up to do the same kind of things that we're now doing. And so viewed from a suitable kind of vantage point, our lives look recognizably Sisyphean. So this is the challenge of Sisyphus. Sisyphus's life is meaningless, and our lives are recognizably Sisyphean. And so it struck me that Shadow had somehow, without, because he is a dog, without understanding there was any such problem at all or any challenge to be met, it struck me that he'd found a way of meeting this challenge. And so that's what the book ultimately turned out to be about.
And you look at a lot of different philosophical points of view through this lens of your dog. And we're not going to have time to talk about all of those, obviously. But before we talk about a few of them, give us a quick overview of what readers are going to find in this book.
Well, it's both a book about dogs and a book about humans. The book about dog, there are lots of stories about dogs doing various things and me reading various things into what they're doing and understanding what they're doing in various ways. It's also a book about the human predicament, what it means to be human, and in particular, what I think is the closest thing we can get to a defining feature of humans, which is the capacity for what's sometimes called reflection. Reflection is the ability to think about yourself, about what you're doing, about why you're doing it, about what life has in store for you, and things like that. We developed this capacity, and as far as we know, no other animal did. It's in dogs, it's minimal at best. And reflection was a great blessing for humans. It allowed us to become what we are, but it also has various drawbacks. And this book is basically about the drawbacks of reflection. And the lens through which this discussion takes place is one provided by the dogs that I've been fortunate enough to share my life with over the years.
And you take that comment about an unexamined life is not worth living, and you say that's really a flawed way of looking at things. And you give examples about dogs who don't reflect, as far as we know, on their lives, and they're perfectly happy.
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, one thing I think reflection takes away is what we might call an appreciation for the marginally positive in life. So I'll give you a couple of examples if we have time. One anyway. And so every afternoon I will say to Shadow, "Do you want to come with?" And this is the signal that we're going to pick up my son across town. So we'll drive. Shadow knows what's coming. He knows there's nothing particularly interesting on the way. We're just going to get in the car. We're going to drive to the school, pick up my son, drive back, come in the house, and nothing else. But you know, the delight and the exuberance whenever I say these magic words is astonishing. He runs around the house, jumps on settees, runs up walls. He's even managed to work out how to leash himself using a slip leash. He tosses it up in the air and inserts his head as it comes down. So what's going on there? Well, I think, you know, this is a great example of the appreciation of the marginally positive. The drive is not like he's going to a dog park crammed full with female German shepherds or anything like that. He's just going for a little drive in the car. But because that's just a little bit better than staying in the house, he gets excited. There was another episode, slightly more grim, but we were out running one day. A few miles from home, Shadow gave out a loud shriek and dropped to the ground. His back legs were paralyzed. The vet thinks it was some kind of spinal embolism, a stroke where a bit of cartilage had worked its way into the blood supply to his spine. So this raised all sorts of issues, such as, you know, well, how am I going to get him home was the most immediate and pressing one. But there's something he did with it took about 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes for the movement to slowly start coming back into his back legs. And one thing he did was during those moments, when he fell, he was lying in the sun, which he doesn't like because we live in Miami. And so he used his front legs, his two working front legs. He wouldn't let me help him because he was terrified, I imagine. But he used his front legs to drag himself into the shade, about 20 feet into the shade. And so, you know, what's the operating principle? Well, okay, this is awful. But at least now in this moment, I'm marginally better off. I'm slightly better off than I was in the previous moment. And because of our capacity for reflection, we understand life and how hard it is and what it has in store for us. And this can be, you know, to varying degrees overwhelming. And a useful antidote to that, I think, is taking the sort of dog's eye view where we just focus on the moments and try to make each one a little bit better than the one before.
I'm talking with Mark Rowlands about the word of dog, what our canine companions can teach us about living a good life. And our conversation continues in a moment. If you're enjoying this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. And thank you. So I think that's one of the many things that you talk about in the book that we can learn from dogs. And one of them, as you just say, is being in the moment and experiencing joy. And experiencing joy, you know, unlike what we seem to be capable of because we reflect on so many other things. But in the moment, it's the most wonderful thing that's happening to this dog. But, you know, as humans, we have to compare it. Is this really, you know, it robs us of that joy in many ways.
Yeah, I think it does, and I think it's the capacity for reflection which takes the moment away from us. Because once you can think of yourself and see yourself against the background of sort of the passage of time and so on, the moment is something that's very difficult to find, and dogs are much better at it than we are.
One of the things that dogs can help us appreciate too is just nature and interacting with nature. You know, he's chasing his iguanas, he's doing other things that bring him a lot of joy. And sometimes we just kind of, you know, are blasé about nature or just fail to connect with it in a way that a dog can and find that joy.
Yeah. Yes, I never thought that I would be, one day walking along a canal bank in Miami and naming my iguanas. I think of them as our iguanas, So I never thought that one day I would be actually naming iguanas on a canal bank. But there I am.
Another interesting story you share is that when your son was born, you were concerned about how the dogs were going to interact with the newborn, but they turned out to be very protective. And it brings up this idea of, do dogs have a sense of morality? They felt like they had some responsibility toward this new member of the house.
Yeah, no, I think they just genuinely loved this new member of the house. So I was surprised because the two dogs at the time were Nina, who was an old and rather crotchety female German Shepherd Malamute mix, and then there was Tess, who was a wolf hybrid, who had some fairly pronounced predatory instincts. So I was a little worried about how the house sharing arrangements would work. But they turned out to be better parents than I was in many respects. If my son so much as squeaked in the middle of the night, then I'd have these two cold noses pressed against my face. Wake up, you negligent dad! Your son needs you. And so this also, I mean, these early months of fatherhood also, and the reaction of the dogs also got me thinking about whether dogs and other animals can act morally, can act for moral reasons. And I think it's an interesting issue because I think there are lots of different conceptions of what's involved in acting morally, but there's one historically prominent and respectable conception according to which, yes, animals can be moral in much the same way that we can, and they're moral when they act on the basis of emotions which have the welfare or well-being of another as their object or content.
Another chapter of the book, you talk about the dog's ability to reason. Mm-hmm. And you say that they can reason, but they'd rather not.
Yeah. There's been quite a few experiments done on the dog's ability to execute certain kinds of inferences. In particular, largely because this is an easy one to test, is what's called disjunctive syllogism, which is an inference of the form either A or B, not A, therefore B. And you can test the ability to do this or something very like it in dogs by way of two canisters, one of which contains food, the other is empty, and you show that it's empty, and so on and so on. So when you run those experiments, I mean, interestingly, it seems that dogs can solve this problem. So if you do it remotely, for example, where the experiment is not in the room, you're using some kind of remote arms, robotic arms, or something similar, dogs will solve the problem. But if there's an experimenter in the room, they'll refuse to solve it themselves and just look at the experimenter's face to get clues. So you might think of dogs. I mean, ChatGPT and variants thereof, is now very big. So ChatGPT use it for all sorts of things, writing letters and so on. So you could argue that ChatGPT and other things like it are becoming part of our sort of extended mind. When we want to do things which involve cognitive abilities, such as write letters, then we get ChatGPT to do it for us. Right, so we spread out the difficulty. It's not our problem anymore so much. We've spread it out onto things around us. I think we are to dogs like ChatGPT is to us. Basically, we're part of its extended mind. Where we the dogs keep us around, so we solve all these sorts of problems for them. I strongly suspect.
Well, we've just talked about a few of the many stories that are in this book, but ultimately it's about philosophy and what dogs' lives can teach us about the human condition. So what are some of the takeaways from this book? What do you want people to understand about being human through this lens of a dog's life?
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to communicate more than anything is what we've lost through this capacity for reflection. That's a kind of recurring motif throughout the book. I start off with a quote from Milton, which describes Adam and Eve coming to self-awareness and so on. And self-awareness makes life it's been a blessing in many ways, but it's also been a curse because it makes life very, very tough for us in a way that it's not for a dog. So I'm not in any way suggesting we should become dogs or even more like dogs or anything like that, because we can't. We are what we are. But there are just certain sorts of moments when you're able to incorporate a bit of dog know-how or wisdom into what you're doing, which I think can help us to a certain extent.
To learn more, the book is The Word of Dog: What Our Canine Companions Can Teach Us About Living a Good Life by Mark Rowlands. Mark, thank you for talking with me today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
If you'd like to purchase The Word of Dog, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.